Scott, I have a double whammy of Resident Evil news for you. One part of this concerns the upcoming Resident Evil 9 video game, and another concerns the upcoming, whether you like it or not, Resident Evil movie. Let's start with Resi 9. And now, your friend and mine, not true, we don't know this person, but regular Resident Evil leaker,
leaker.
Golem, who has been doing the rounds for years and hilariously quit leaking Resident Evil news a few years ago in the same way that every 3 months I quit shotgunning crisps, which means it never sticks.
Crisp sandwich.
Is back with the sort of rumor that's doing the rounds that Leon Kennedy, who you know from Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, and of course, everyone's favorite, Resident Evil 6.
And my heart.
And your heart is apparently back 100% as the main character of Resident Evil 9. Now, this obviously comes after we had Ethan Winters for Resi 7 and Resi 8. We had Chris Redfield in both of those games as well. And this is interesting because Dusk Golem a few years ago actually claimed that Jill Valentine at one point was going to be the protagonist. Apparently, they say that that is no longer the case. That was a very early draft of the game. But interestingly, on the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit, users have pointed out that the director of Resident Evil 9, who is confirmed to be the same person who directed Resident Evil 7, is following Leon's current voice actor. And that's the only American voice actor that he's following. And it's important to note that they haven't actually worked together before on anything else. So that could
I love this. I love this level of sleuthing.
This is the thing. I mean, Dusk Golem, we were joking about it earlier in the video about him being our friend. It's just the fact that Dusk Golem is like the Resident Evil leaker, and they have, revealed so much information in the past, but some of it has been hit and miss and often contradicts itself. Like, they were the ones who said Jill Valentine was going to be in the game.
Yeah.
And they also, interestingly, said in their thread, I think it was taken from Discord, but written up on Gaming Leaks and Rumors, that they wouldn't be surprised if once Resident Evil 9 is out in the wild, that you might see early concept art of the Jill version pop up at some point.
Cool.
It was doing the rounds, a rumor was doing the rounds last year as well, that it might be Jill and Leon as core headliners. I love Leon Kennedy as much as the next guy. I stole his hair many a time. But for me, the idea of a Jill game after so long, that was what I personally wanted, because we have had a lot of Leon recently. I've got a few more things about the next remake, but thoughts on this?
Well, I was going to say the version of Jill from RE3, unless I'm getting my characters mixed up.
You are not.
Good. That version of Jill's phenomenal. Give her way more screen time. I love the attitude that she has. I know obviously some of it is up because she's up against Nemesis, and she's like, for the love of God, just die. And I love the whole vibe of the writing, at least in that game. But yeah, I think that would have been a more, interesting way to go. I feel like we're a bit, we know what a Leon-fronted game is. We just got that whole thing with RE4's remake. But it should still be fun. Leon's a fun character, and I hope they do. I just want more with the melee side of stuff. I want to kick a zombie's head off.
Well, this is going to be interesting because so much time has passed in the Resident Evil mythology at this point. The original game takes place in the 90s. We're now in 2025, right? Yes. So this is going to be an older version of Leon. He was already a little bit older. And when we saw him in Resi 6, I quite like that. I like the idea of allowing a character to grow rather than have them be perpetually the same age.
True.
Or whatever it is. And so far, whether they make this canon to the next mainline game or not, in the remake sort of trilogy that they have right now, RE2, RE3, and RE4, Leon's story connects seemingly way more between RE2 and RE4. Like you said, there seems to be way more intent, way more cohesion between who that character is, even though there are still differences and whatnot. So I wonder what version of Leon are they looking at? Are they looking at the most recent version, or are they going to go back to 6 or the original version of 4 and carry on that style of character?
When are we remaking RE5 and 6? Because they need to get them out the way to be like, hey, this is what he was doing in 6, and this is what he's doing in 9.
No one wants to know what he's doing in 6. No, 6 will quietly slide under the rug story-wise.
6 had good ideas, damn it.
It wanted to be the Avengers of Resident Evil, and partly got it right, but mostly got it wrong. And that comes as a defender of Resi 6, by the way. No, I think making Leon the protagonist from a pure sort of franchise and business perspective makes sense. We've seen the success of Resi 2 and Resi 4 specifically, both obviously Leon-fronted games. He's probably the fan favorite character right now, or at least most recognizable character. We've had those two titles with Chris playing a part. Obviously, Chris was a huge part of 5 and 6 as well. I'm a little bit Chris'd out, truth be told.
That's fair.
Leon would be, second in that regard, but it feels like every time we get a new version of Resi, Leon is kind of at the forefront of it, if that makes sense.
He's almost like the face of Resident Evil. Maybe just because of how big 4 got, but yeah.
What would you do, though, with this next game if you're bringing Leon back? Obviously, this is the director of Resident Evil 7. Do you want something radically different from the remake games that we've had? Will they do something like a first-person Leon game,
Effing hope not. I don't want any more first-person Resident Evil. I feel like all the high sales of the remakes have proven that third person's better than first person. Can we just all admit it?
I mean, 7 and 8 still sold really well.
They did, didn't they? But I just want to be. I want to see the character. I don't want to beat them. And I want them to re-embrace the third-person love.
Yeah.
I feel like they've tested the waters on both sides across the last decade and or almost that from 2017 onwards, and it is kind of interesting. I'm curious what the wider fan base thinks of dude whose name I'm forgetting.
Go on, Ethan.
Ethan Winters. I'm curious what people think of him retrospectively because we're going to do spoilers for RE Village, but the reveal that he was like made of mold.
Unreal.
In a good way?
Yeah, no.
Not for me, but it was, I thought, I don't know, him. You've got Rose, who's also got superpowers.
Yeah.
I didn't actually play the DLC, but I'm curious if they carry her forward. Like, do you bother with all that mold stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Because mold is almost like another sort of God particle plot device, and you can bring people back from the dead. You can, like, cut them up and they're fine. Like, RE8 went really, really over the top.
It did. I personally now would get away from the mold, but I do think it's going to be, which is what I said to my landlord in 2018. Hey-o!
Still got problems. Mold is still there.
Where the hell was I? I've just been overtaken by a spirit there. The mold. I don't want them necessarily to be like the main driving force this time around.
Right.
Arguably, they weren't necessarily in 8, though it does come back into the kind of story towards the end, and it's revealed to have ties with, the original viruses from the first few Resident Evil games and all of that stuff. Like, they are interlinked in that regard. But yeah, I think having those two games, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, that was a nice era for me personally. That was a good long time. We've had that era now for 8 years, going on 8 years. If they bring Leon back, I wouldn't like just them to retread the greatest hits. I'd want it to be a new story like Resi 4 was, a new threat, a new location. And obviously tie it into the stuff that's just happened in 7 and 8 as well, but I like the reinvention of this franchise, as you know. So even though they're bringing back a character like this, who at one point I think could have almost felt, I don't know, too ridiculous to star in a game in the modern age. I think they managed to humanize him again with Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4, and they've got the balance right, I think, between superhero, cartoon Leon, and actual human person.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing, especially if you're doing an aging character. It's like, do you want to do a deeper thematic? Do you want to do why he fights for, because on the animated side, on the 3D animated movies, they've only gone more and more anime. The most recent one of them, that was a proper Avengers style thing. And so there's a whole wing of the Resident Evil fandom that love that stuff.
Yeah.
Shout out to Cy White. But at the same time, I think it is interesting doing a more, what do you do for the mainstream? Like, what do people think of when they think of Resident Evil? I just Googled the sales because I was curious. I remember Capcom saying RE7 sold incredibly well, 14 million copies. RE8 was less than that, 10.5 million. I would say, we talk about the reinvention of Resident Evil. I loved 7 and I didn't vibe with 8.
Ooh,
I'm curious whether they could do a smaller scale story again for 7. I don't know.
It's interesting because it is the director of 7, and I think that game's strength is that it is so different. Even in terms of the tone, it is so much more American rather than Western horror influences. It's riffing so much from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Evil Dead remake and the Evil Dead originals. And to its benefit, I think it does feel very different. It felt like a statement at the time.
Totally.
And Resi 8, even though it is so different from the other games in terms of its enemies, werewolves and the gothic village that you're in, castles, vampires and stuff like that, it kind of structurally and gameplay-wise is kind of just Resident Evil 4 in first person with the action focus,
a lot of RE4
which is
in it,
great, don't get me wrong. But I'm first off, I'm just interested to see where they take it, and I wonder if my boy Ethan is referenced at all, because Scott, I love Ethan.
What's to love about him?
He's piss funny, man. His arm gets chopped off all the time. And even before they had an explanation for that, when it happens again in Resi 8 and he puts it back on, I thought, this is camp. It's the best kind of camp in what I like from Resi I
love camp horror as well. If you steer entirely into that, that's awesome. It didn't feel like that was in there, because our RE8, I feel like all the marketing was all over the place with RE8. It was like, we're selling it on Lady Dimitrescu, we're selling it on Chris Redfield shooting Maya, we're selling it on the gameplay stuff, the RE4 bits, we're selling it on the werewolves.
Yeah,
we're doing all these different things that like didn't really cohere, and then you kind of had, it just didn't feel like a through line. Like you had this stuff with all the injuries in RE7. And then 8, because it was more over the top again, was like, wouldn't it be fun if actually he had a superpower and that was why he was able to do the thing? And I was like, I guess so, but you didn't feel like you were leading with that. Now it feels kind of dumb.
Yeah, that's a video for another time, a podcast for another time, I think.
I should say, by the way, that the sales figures that I pulled from before were from VGCharts.com if anyone wants to go have a look.
And I mean, it makes sense. I mean, Resi 7 has been out much longer than 8 as well. I think the fact that got to 10 million so quickly, I know it's going into its 4th year now, but there's I know it's disgusting. Anyway, does this next thing mean anything to you?
I hope so.
Dusk Golem also says that the next remake from Resident Evil is not going to be Code Veronica, like a lot of us suspected, or Resident Evil 5, like some of us in this room
RE6,
hoped.
baby.
Or certainly not RE6. Like, one or two people in the world hoped. It's apparently going to be Resident Evil 0, which already had the remake treatment on GameCube alongside the original game. I think this makes sense in terms of it being the easiest to adapt. Like I said, you already have the original remake there. It's a bit more straightforward than adapting something like Code Veronica, which both in terms of its story and its structure would maybe need a lot more
So we're thinking isometric, probably not tank controls, but not over shoulder.
Well, it seems like it is going to be over the shoulder. I think it's going to be in the style of Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4. But we're just taking the story and characters, Billy and Rebecca from that game and doing it. I think I'm not a huge fan of Resident Evil 0, but it's an easy one to do. It goes very mad towards the end of the game, but you could do something interesting with it. It'll be fascinating to see whether they implement co-op, because the original wasn't co-op, but you had this character switching mechanic. I wonder how they're going to adapt that to a more action-focused third-person game. Will they make it co-op? Will they just keep it something that you swap between? I don't know. It's an interesting one to do.
Yeah.
It's, for me, the least interesting of the crop that you had to choose from.
Yes.
But this doesn't cancel out getting any other of the other games in the long run, I suppose.
I wonder if they're doing 0 because I view the whole thing as like one giant sort of course correct for like, okay, if we were going to start over and like take all the knowledge, all the plot points, all the storylines that we have done across the last 20 years and start over again, how do we thread them in there so everything feels a lot more purposeful and everything feels a lot more cohesive, like we said with Leon's story? Do you do RE0 so you can put more mold stuff in there and try and solidify and codify RE7 and 8 and whatever the hell 9's going to be, and everything that happens with Spencer, like like the foundations of Umbrella and people who are just mentioned on post-it notes at the end of RE8. I think if it depends how much you're going to rejig, but if you're doing this new canon thing, then you might do it with that.
It just seems mad to me to kind of do all of these games, all of these remakes, without going back and remaking Resident Evil 1. And I know that has an excellent remake already. But I mean, they've already done Resident Evil 0, They already made that for the GameCube.
That's true.
Maybe I think I described it as a remake there. I think it was an original for the GameCube, not something that already existed.
Yes.
But obviously that came alongside the remake.
They might do the full-on over-shoulder treatment, or that's the kind of thing. Maybe they're figuring that out. What should they do? If a first-person thing, RE7, RE8, over-shoulders like the 2, 3, 4 remakes.
Yeah.
Then when we get to maybe the 30th anniversary or something, which actually is in a couple of years,
Very soon.
Then you do... Or you announce the full-on remake of the original. Maybe that's the thing.
I'd like that to happen, Scott.
Yeah.
Do you know what else I'd like to happen?
Go on.
The new Resident Evil movie, baby! I am a glutton for punishment, and no matter how many times they announce live-action Resident Evil things, I will watch them. I sat through all of that absolute trash Resident Evil Netflix TV show.
Oh, God.
Whose only good thing was...
Worse than the pandemic.
Who was the... I've forgotten his name. Who was the guy who played Wesker in that show?
Lance Reddick.
He was so good.
Yes.
He was like the best, most defining thing about that show. I wish it was just about him in that trench coat kicking ass, but it wasn't. It was this weird thing between the past and the future. It was post-apocalyptic, but it wasn't. It was a complete mess, is what I'm trying to say.
We did a video on that. I don't even know what we called it, but
probably this is the end of all things, something similar to that.
That thing releasing in the middle of a half apocalypse was that was a bad time.
But we got that TV show, and also from Netflix, we got Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, which I know a lot of people like. To me, that's arguably worse than the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, because it feels like Welcome to Raccoon City is trying to appeal to the fans through the iconography, the characters it includes, and the story beats, but it manages to mess them all up in an even worse way. It's like trying to be this fan-pleasing thing, but gets everything wrong.
It's one of the only...
I didn't love it.
Only Resi movies that I didn't see because my Resident Evil confidants, yourself and Cy White, said it was trash. So I was like, I'm good.
Boring as well. It feels like you don't get to a zombie until an hour in. It just feels low budget. It feels low stakes. But apparently that's not going to be the case for the next Resident Evil movie. It was announced a few months ago that director Zach Cregger, who directed Barbarian a few years ago, is in the director's chair for this, and the fact that he is the director of the movie, according to The Hollywood Reporter, has apparently started a bidding war for the rights to it, with the likes of Netflix and Warner Brothers involved, trying to be the ones to secure this film. It's a co-production, which I thought was interesting, with PlayStation Productions, who we talked about the other week, and are producing stuff like The Last of Us TV show and Uncharted and all of that. Pretty much every big PlayStation live action thing is from that team. And apparently the take is going to be more faithful to the initial games rather than a complete disregard like the Paul W.S. Anderson ones were. But it is Zach Cregger who is the kind of linchpin of this entire project, and you made a big sigh when I said his name.
I hated Barbarian. I was just thinking also that we can expect an immaculate set of marketing and then a great film until it completely bins its own arse in the second half.
Maybe so. A lot of people liked Barbarian more than I did. I still thought it was a great movie. I still thought it was it showed a lot of promise for him as a director. Apparently, according to this report, his latest one, which is coming out under Warner Brothers, is test screening incredibly well, which is why they kind of want to keep him in-house and are bidding so much for this flick. It just feels like this movie, whether it turns out to be good or bad, is going to be a much bigger deal than the Resident Evil live-action stuff has been in the past. The fact that you've got PlayStation involved, the fact that you've got proper big studios bidding for it. It's just, is this franchise cursed when it comes to live action stuff? I don't know. Maybe
the 2000s ones, that was still an impressive run.
Yeah.
They're badly made movies, but a lot of people had fun watching them. I certainly did.
I like them.
Like I mentioned, Camp Horror and stuff before. Like those movies were incredibly dumb but they were fun to like follow through. But obviously they were like their own thing as well. So it is that conversation on like, what is Resident Evil in live action? Should it be its own thing? Should you put new characters in there and they interact with the big characters? Or do you cast everybody like Welcome to Raccoon City did? I feel like there wasn't really that much buzz around Raccoon City. And then the budget, every time they showed a screenshot, it just looked terrible. The budget looked really bad, itchy, tasty on the wall, whatever. But I think the casting was what put a lot of people off. Just didn't look like their characters. Like, not that I can remember the specific actors, I just remember the conversation saying like, that person looks a bit too small, a little bit too weak or whatever it is. And you have these really over-the-top, almost super heroic depictions of these characters now in the games, and especially on the animated movies, like I said. So to do a live-action version, it has to meaningfully be something else if you're connoting that character again.
No, I definitely get that. It's going to be interesting to see what they mean by more faithful to those initial games. Does that mean in terms of finally just directly adapting one game and not trying to amalgamate a bunch of different storylines? Will we get the Spencer Mansion? Will we get Resi 2?
Do you want that?
Well, here's what I was going to ask you. I think it's interesting that every time Hollywood tries to make Resident Evil a thing, their understanding of what Resident Evil is so far removed with the current era of Resident Evil. I know they're identifiable, I know they're iconic, they always go back to Raccoon City, they always go back to the zombies.
Make it a zombie flick.
Yeah.
Like 101.
But we haven't, in the games, I know we've had the remakes, but in terms of like the modern entries, we've kind of moved away from that stuff for the most part. We've gone to Ethan Winters and The Mold, and we've even gone to like Resi 4 and all of that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see like the third, fourth attempt at just a zombie Resident Evil movie. And I wonder whether by going back to the initial games they mean the first 3 or they mean 4. Maybe they want a complete separation from the Paul W.S. Anderson movies and Welcome to Raccoon City and just say, no, we're doing Leon Kennedy in this European village with some crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, I didn't mind. I didn't finish it actually, but the Infinite Darkness animated movie, that's a Leon Kennedy thing. But it's like the idea of just plugging a story in between some of the games. Like I would take that. It gets away from the comparisons to the games. It's not as tired as, like you said, doing the Spencer Mansion again or whatever. So personally, I would rather they did something else. And I have a soft spot for those 2000s movies. Like I think everyone does. I feel like a lot of people saw them, were like, yeah, this is bad, but I can buy the popcorn and watch it. It's fun. I'm not watching it over and over again, but there's a lot of fun parts to them. And so, yeah, if we're doing Resident Evil in live action, because it is so inspired by, so many zombie flicks in the first place, I think it's boring if you just do another zombie movie. It kind of has to lean on its campness and its more over the top stuff. Just get Mia Jovovich back in. Just of all the legacy castings we're doing, she can just pop up for a bit.
I think I'd actually take it. I think I would. Oh, I love those movies.
She can be the aging heroine. She can do the thing. She can kick off a wall, kick a dog in the face.
It's so bad. Give her her superpowers back. Give her the clones back. The first one, I think, is actually really well made. It looks great. The rest are pretty bad, but they're also the best.
The laser scene.
Oh.